Hi, enjoy listening. The lunchroom clock ticked louder than usual, each second scraping against Savannah Clark's nerves. She sat alone at the small table tucked into the corner of the boutique stockroom, a modest sandwich growing stale on the napkin in front of her. One slice of white bread, a thin layer of margarine, and a sliver of processed ham. That was all she could manage that week. Her lunch break had another 25 minutes to go, but she had already run out of things to distract herself with. Her phone's screen was cracked, and the Wi-Fi didn't reach the back room, so scrolling through social media was out. Not that she enjoyed it much anymore. Too many smiling faces, too many people eating real lunches and living real lives. She picked at the crust with her fingers, tearing it into tiny pieces. Her appetite had vanished around the same time as her last paycheck. Savannah worked at Luxe Look, a boutique specializing in high-end clothing rentals, suits, cocktail dresses, shoes, and the occasional vintage hat. Weddings, job interviews, charity galas, the boutique catered to all of it. The store was clean, well organized, and surprisingly busy. It was the kind of place where appearances mattered more than the stories behind the customers. She didn't mind the work. In fact, she liked it. Helping someone find the perfect outfit for a milestone moment gave her a strange sense of peace. For a brief second, she could feel part of something meaningful, part of someone else's joy, even if it wasn't her own. But it wasn't all chiffon and cashmere. Patricia Klein, the boutique's owner, ran the store like a kingdom she never wanted to give up. She was sleek, sharp, and always watching. And Savannah, with her quiet voice and hand-me-down sneakers, was the court jester nobody invited. The only reason Patricia kept her on staff, Savannah suspected, was because she was punctual, polite, and didn't talk back. Unlike the other two salesgirls, Mandy and Jess, who flirted with clients, took extra long smoke breaks, and regularly mocked Savannah's earnest foster kid vibe. Still, Savannah didn't complain. Complaining didn't pay the bills. At 21, she already knew life didn't come with safety nets. Everything she had earned by crawling on her knees to get it. A room of her own, a steady paycheck, and the right to buy expired lunch meat without asking anyone's permission. She looked down at her sandwich again and let out a sigh. "Don't be ungrateful," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the humming of the backroom fridge. "This is more than you used to have." She stood, carefully rewrapped the sandwich and placed it back in the mini-fridge for later, just in case. Waste was a luxury she couldn't afford. The bell over the front door rang, signalling a customer. Savannah smoothed her blouse, wiped her palms on her slacks, and headed toward the showroom. Time to put on the smile. Time to pretend her stomach wasn't empty and her heart wasn't tired. Because no one rents clothes from a girl who looks like she's falling apart. Her mother, Amanda Clark, worked the evening shift at a chemical plant outside of town. The job was dangerous and underpaid, but it came with health insurance. Barely. Amanda was tall and thin, with tired eyes and cracked hands. She loved Savannah fiercely. But loving someone doesn't always mean you can take care of them. There were no grandparents, no aunts or uncles, no safety nets, just the two of them in a damp apartment with flickering lights and peeling wallpaper. Amanda often went without dinner to make sure Savannah ate. Some nights, they split a can of beans and laughed like it was a gourmet meal. On the good days, Amanda brought home a bruised peach or a discounted rotisserie chicken. But the good days were rare. When Savannah turned 5, Amanda started getting headaches. Then came the fatigue. Then the coughing. By the time she finally agreed to see a doctor, it was too late. Stage 4. Metastatic. Inoperable. Savannah never forgot the look in her mother's eyes the day they left the hospital. A look that said, "I'm sorry I couldn't stay." Amanda died 3 months later in a hospice room that smelled like rubbing alcohol and fading dreams. No one came to claim Savannah. No long-lost relatives stepped forward. No friendly neighbours offered to help. Social workers did what they always did. Processed paperwork, arranged transport, and handed her off to the foster system like she was a misplaced backpack. Savannah was 5 years old and already used to being forgotten. The group home she landed in was a converted Victorian house on the edge of town. The outside looked charming. The inside was something else entirely. Crowded, chaotic, and loud. Kids with anger in their fists and sadness in their bones filled every corner. She didn't fit in. Savannah had always been quiet, shy even. But grief turned her inward completely. She began to stutter. Not at first. It started slowly, with mispronounced words and hesitant pauses. But soon, her mouth couldn't keep up with her thoughts. Words jammed in her throat like traffic. And when they did come out, they came out wrong. The other kids noticed, and they were merciless. They mocked her in whispers and in front of staff. They laughed when she tried to read aloud or ask for help. They called her names. Broken, mute, dummy. Savannah stopped speaking altogether unless she absolutely had to. She cried at night into her pillow, silently screaming for a mother who would never come. She wanted out. Out of the home. Out of the memories. Out of the life that had been handed to her like a punishment she didn't deserve. She made herself invisible during the day, hoping to avoid teasing. At night, she would lie in bed and count the stars outside her window, whispering to herself, "Someday, someday I'll leave." But there was one person who noticed her. Mrs. Ruth Caldwell taught English as a second language at the local elementary school. She was nearing retirement, wore long skirts and old cardigans, and had a warm, slightly raspy voice that made kids feel safe. One afternoon after class, she pulled Savannah aside. "I know it's hard to talk, sweetheart," she said gently, "but I'd like to help you. Would that be okay?" Savannah just nodded. No words came out, but her eyes said yes. Ruth began meeting her twice a week after school, sometimes even during lunch. They sat in the library or the corner of an empty classroom, working through syllables, sounds, and breathing exercises. Ruth never rushed her, never mocked her, never made her feel like a burden. Slowly, Savannah's speech began to improve. The stutter didn't disappear overnight, but it faded, like fog lifting after a storm. For the first time in her life, Savannah started to believe she might not be broken after all. Ruth became more than a teacher. She became family. When Savannah turned 10, Ruth began helping her with more than speech. She taught her how to cook simple meals, helped her open her first savings account, and explained things no one else ever had, like how to write a resume or ask questions at the doctor's office. Ruth even brought Savannah home for holidays. Her small apartment smelled like cinnamon and old books. There was a cat named Wendell who slept on Savannah's lap, and a window seat that looked out over a park. For a few brief days every year, Savannah got to pretend she had a real home. By the time Savannah aged out of foster care at 18, she had no illusions. Life wasn't fair. It never would be. But she also had something most kids in the system didn't: a person. Someone who cared. Ruth helped her fill out forms, navigate housing applications, and apply for jobs. She was the one who drove Savannah to meet the landlord who owned a run-down but affordable apartment on the city's edge. When Savannah signed the lease and got her first set of keys, she cried in Ruth's arms for a full 5 minutes. It wasn't much, a tiny place with water-stained ceilings and one stubborn radiator. But it was hers. No one could send her away. No one could take it from her. For the first time, Savannah Clark had a door she could close behind her, and a future that maybe wasn't entirely out of reach. Mrs. Ruth Caldwell had never planned to become a teacher. In her youth, she dreamed of being a librarian. Quiet days surrounded by books and people who whispered. But life had different plans. A divorce, a cancelled move across the country, a sudden job opening at a local middle school. Sometimes fate rearranged everything without asking for permission. By the time Savannah met her, Ruth was already a fixture at the school, known for her calm demeanor, herbal tea collection, and her unwavering belief that no child was beyond help. She noticed Savannah on the first day of her ESL pull-out class. The girl didn't belong there. Her English was fine, but someone had checked a box on a form, and now she was placed with students who barely knew how to say hello in English. Savannah sat at the back of the room, silent and still as stone, eyes down, lips trembling any time she was called on. Ruth could tell the girl wasn't just quiet. She was wounded. During break one day, Ruth gently pulled her aside. "Would you mind staying after class for a minute?" she asked softly. Savannah's face immediately flushed with panic, but she nodded. Once the other students filed out, Ruth knelt beside her desk, speaking in the careful rhythm of someone who understood how fragile trust could be. "I think you're in the wrong class, sweetheart. You don't need help with English," she said. "But I can hear that you have trouble getting words out. Is it hard to speak sometimes?" Savannah hesitated, then gave a tiny nod. "Do you want some help with that? I know a few things that might make it easier." She didn't ask for details. She didn't demand a story. She simply offered help. And that, more than anything, is what made Savannah say yes. They started meeting in the library twice a week. It wasn't official tutoring. There was no paperwork, no mandates from the district, just a teacher who used to be a speech therapist and a girl whose voice had gone quiet from too much hurt. At first, Savannah struggled even to repeat syllables. Ruth brought flashcards, tongue twisters, and breathing exercises. They practiced in front of mirrors and laughed when Savannah's face scrunched up mid-sound. Slowly, the words started flowing more smoothly. But the real change wasn't just in Savannah's speech. It was in her eyes. Over time, she began to smile more. Her shoulders relaxed. She started raising her hand in class, if only halfway. When someone asked her a question, she no longer looked for a place to hide. One day, Ruth brought her a worn copy of Anne of Green Gables. "I think you'll like this one," she said. "It's about a girl who doesn't belong anywhere, but somehow finds her place anyway." Savannah read it 3 times in a row. That spring, Ruth invited her over for dinner. It wasn't an official foster placement. Ruth had long since retired from trying to navigate the red tape of that system, but she wanted Savannah to know she was welcome. The apartment was modest but cozy, filled with crocheted blankets, framed photos, and soft jazz playing in the background. Savannah sat at the kitchen table, nervously clutching a cloth napkin, while Ruth served a casserole and poured iced tea into glass tumblers. After dinner, they played a board game. Ruth's cat, Wendell, sat curled on Savannah's feet. It was the first time in years she felt like she belonged anywhere. That night, as Ruth drove her back to the group home, Savannah stared out the window and whispered, "Thank you." Ruth didn't reply. She just reached across the car and gently squeezed Savannah's hand. From that point on, Ruth became Savannah's person. She showed up to school plays, helped her with job applications, and celebrated birthdays with cupcakes and candles, even when Savannah insisted she didn't want a fuss. When Savannah turned 16 and got her first part-time job at a diner, Ruth bought her a pair of non-slip shoes and a small purse that wasn't falling apart at the seams. "She's not my daughter," Ruth would tell friends and co-workers, "but I love her like one." She never pressured Savannah to call her mum. Never demanded anything in return. She was simply there, steady, quiet, and fiercely protective. When Savannah graduated from high school, no honors, no big scholarships, just a plain blue gown and a folded diploma. Ruth was the only person in the audience holding a handmade sign with her name on it. That night, they had cake at Ruth's apartment. Savannah smiled the whole time. The apartment wasn't much. One room, slanted ceilings, and a floor that creaked with every step. The walls were an odd shade of yellow, faded, like an old photograph, and the windows rattled when the wind blew hard. But to Savannah, it might as well have been a castle. It was the first place she'd ever lived in that was hers. No shared bedrooms with crying toddlers. "I still think this building is one good sneeze away from collapsing," Ruth muttered as they reached the top. Savannah laughed, her face glowing with something close to pride. "Yeah, but the sneeze would have to be mine." The apartment came with exactly one perk, a small skylight above the bed that let in morning light and the occasional raindrop when the seal failed. Savannah fell asleep most nights, staring up at that square of sky, listening to the soft thrum of the laundromat's machines below. She worked long hours, first at a diner, bussing tables and scrubbing floors, then at a grocery store, where she stocked shelves and counted change so many times she could hear the register beep in her sleep. The pay was terrible, the manager's worse, but it was enough to cover rent, a few groceries, and bus fare. Some nights she skipped dinner. Some months she chose between toilet paper and phone minutes. But she never missed rent. Never came close. Ruth called her every Sunday, like clockwork. "You eating enough?" "Trying." "You sleeping at all?" "Sort of." "Still keeping that door locked at night?" "Yes, Ruth." Savannah learned how to stretch spaghetti over 3 meals, how to hem her own pants, how to fix a leaky faucet with rubber bands and stubbornness. She learned that even the smallest space, when claimed with dignity, could become sacred. She decorated the walls with postcards from thrift shops, photos of places she'd never been but hoped to see. A lighthouse in Maine, a row of cherry blossoms in DC, a desert highway that stretched so far it felt like freedom. One night, after a particularly long shift at the grocery store, she sat on her mattress with aching feet and a bag of cold rice. She took out her notebook, the one Ruth had given her back in high school, and began to write. Not poetry, not stories, just thoughts. "It's hard, but I'm not scared like I used to be. Today I smiled at a customer. He didn't smile back, but I didn't take it personally. Maybe surviving is enough for now." Over time, the notebook filled with small truths, tiny victories, pieces of a girl who was finally building something of her own. She didn't have friends, not really. The girls at work gossiped and scrolled through dating apps on break. The boys in the building ignored her, except for the one who smoked out back and once asked if she wanted to hang. She didn't. Not yet. Trust took time. And Savannah had learned, painfully, that it should never be given away lightly. But loneliness wasn't the same as emptiness. Each morning she made her bed, lit a candle, brushed her hair. Those things mattered. They told the world, I am here. I have worth. This space belongs to me. One day, walking home from work in the rain, she passed a man sitting outside the laundromat. He was older, maybe in his 60s, wearing a ragged coat. His shoes soaked through. Most people rushed past without looking. Savannah paused. She didn't have money to spare, not even close. But she had half a granola bar in her bag. She knelt beside him and held it out. Here, she said softly. It's not much, but the man looked up. His eyes were a pale blue, weary but clear. You're the first person to stop all day, he said. He took the bar gently, as if it were made of glass. Thank you. She smiled, then stood. Stay dry, okay? As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, a strange warmth bloomed in her chest. Maybe she couldn't change the world. Maybe she would never be rich or famous or even fully healed. But she could be kind. And sometimes kindness was enough to keep a soul alive. It was a Tuesday morning in early fall. One of those rare days when the air was crisp but not cold. When the sunlight made everything feel clean and possible. Savannah had just stepped out of her apartment with her work apron tucked under her arm when she saw him. The man was standing across the street near the old bus stop bench. He wasn't doing anything in particular, just watching. His grey suit was pressed and clean, out of place in their run-down corner of the city. He held a leather briefcase and wore polished shoes, expensive ones, Savannah guessed, though she'd never been good with brands. What stood out most wasn't the suit or the shoes, but the way he looked at her. Not like the others did, not with judgment, pity, or threat. His gaze held recognition, as if he were trying to remember where he'd seen her before. Savannah looked away quickly and hurried down the block toward the diner. But as she crossed the street, she glanced back. The man was gone. She told herself it was nothing. Maybe he was just waiting for someone. Maybe he got off at the wrong stop. But something about him stayed in her mind all day. The way he stood so still. The way he seemed to see her. A week passed. Then 2. And then he was there again. This time, she saw him from the window of the laundromat downstairs, where she'd gone to wash her uniforms. He stood under a street lamp across the road, reading a folded newspaper, as if the block wasn't filled with broken curbs and potholes. Savannah's stomach tightened. She almost went outside, almost walked right up to him to ask, "What do you want?" But something held her back. An instinct, maybe, or fear of what his answer might be. Instead, she waited. The third time she saw him, he was closer. It was late afternoon, and she was carrying groceries home. Her bag tore near the steps, sending a can of beans rolling across the sidewalk. She knelt to grab it, and there he was, standing just a few feet away. "Need a hand?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. She looked up. His face was kind but unreadable. No smirk, no tension, just quiet attention. "I'm okay," she said quickly, clutching the can to her chest. "Thanks." He nodded, not pressing. As she rose to her feet, he added softly, "I'm not here to bother you." "Then why are you here?" The words surprised her. They came out sharper than she intended, and her stutter didn't even surface. He seemed to consider her for a moment. "I'm looking for someone," he said. Savannah's pulse quickened. "And you think it's me?" "No," he replied. "I know it's you." They stood in silence for a moment. The sounds of the street around them, the distant horn, a barking dog, someone yelling 2 blocks over. She crossed her arms. "You've been watching me." "I wanted to be sure." "Sure of what?" He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded photo. He held it out to her, but didn't force it into her hands. She took it carefully. It was a picture of a little girl, 5 or 6 years old, maybe, sitting on a swing in a park. Her face was rounder, her hair in messy pigtails, but the eyes, they were unmistakable. Her eyes. Savannah's breath caught. She stared at the photo, then at him. "Where did you get this?" He exhaled slowly, as though he'd been holding the story in for years. "My name is Charles Delaney. I'm a lawyer. But more importantly, I was your father's friend, your real father." Savannah blinked. "My real?" "You were taken from him when you were very young," Charles said. "There was a complicated custody situation. Lies. Legal tricks. He never stopped looking for you." Her legs felt weak. "He's alive," she whispered. Charles nodded. "He's been searching for over a decade. Private investigators, online databases, old school records. He had very little to go on. But I kept searching too. And 3 weeks ago, I found a photo of you on the diner's website. You were in the background. I recognized your eyes." Savannah's heart thudded against her ribs. This couldn't be real. All her life, she'd assumed her parents didn't want her, or couldn't, or simply disappeared. The records were sealed. No one had ever explained. Now a man in a suit was telling her she hadn't been abandoned, but stolen? "I don't understand," she murmured. "I'll explain everything," he said. "I just wanted to see who you'd become. Make sure you were safe. Make sure you are strong enough to hear it. Savannah stared at him, her voice trembling. Why now? Because your father is dying, Charles said gently. He wants to see you before it's too late. The next morning, Savannah sat at Ruth's kitchen table, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of peppermint tea she hadn't touched. Wendell, the cat, rubbed lazily against her leg, but she barely noticed. Ruth sat across from her, listening with her usual calm as Savannah explained everything. Charles Delaney, the photo. 2 days later, Savannah stood at the edge of a gleaming train platform, a small duffel bag at her feet, and her heart threatening to break through her ribs. Charles stood beside her, dressed in his same tailored suit, hands in his coat pockets, respectfully silent. The train ride was 6 hours long. They sat across from each other, a quiet tension between them. Every so often, he'd offer her snacks, trail mix, bottled water, a sandwich from the cafe car. She declined most of them. Her stomach was a tight knot. They passed towns and cornfields, glimpses of hills and rivers flashing by the windows. Savannah tried to imagine the man she was going to meet. Would he be kind, bitter? Would he even want her? As the train pulled into the station, Charles finally broke the silence. He doesn't want to overwhelm you. You can take your time. No pressure. Savannah nodded, unable to speak. A black car met them at the station, and the driver took them through quiet, tree-lined streets until they reached a gated property at the edge of a small, picturesque town. The house behind the gate was elegant, but not enormous. 2 stories of brick and ivy, the kind of place built for permanence, not show. They pulled into the driveway, her breath caught in her throat. Charles turned to her as the car stopped. You okay? No, she whispered, and then, yes, I think so. They walked up the stone steps. The door opened before they knocked. A woman stood there, grey-haired, slim, with piercing green eyes that reminded Savannah of herself. Savannah? She asked, voice thick with emotion. I'm Margaret. I've taken care of your father for years. Hi, Savannah murmured. He's awake, Margaret said, stepping aside. He's been waiting for you. Savannah stepped inside. The house smelt like lavender and wood polish. A grandfather clock ticked somewhere in the background. Charles led her down a hallway, past framed photos she couldn't bear to look at, and gently pushed open a door at the end. The room was filled with sunlight and silence. A man lay in the bed near the window, his body frail under a pale blue blanket. An oxygen tube looped around his ears. His face was thinner than she expected, with deep lines etched around his mouth and eyes. But those eyes, they were hers. He turned toward her, slowly, as if afraid she might disappear. Savannah, he breathed. Just her name, nothing else. Her feet moved before her brain could stop them. She sat in the chair beside the bed. Her hands shook. You look just like your mother, he said softly. But you have my eyes. She didn't know what to say. I didn't know where they took you, he whispered. I tried. I spent every cent I had trying to get you back. But they made sure I'd never find you. And then I got sick. Tears stung Savannah's eyes. Why didn't they want me to know? Your mother's family didn't want her raising a child with me, he said. They told the courts I was unstable, dangerous. None of it was true, but I lost everything. They put you in the system, changed your name. I thought I'd never see you again. She sat in silence, her hands curled into fists in her lap. The ache in her chest was different than anything she'd ever felt. Not pain, not relief, something in between. I didn't want to come, she whispered. I was afraid, but now that I'm here. He waited, eyes full of hope. I think I'm glad I did. He smiled, barely, but it was there. They spent the afternoon together. He told her stories about the day she was born, her first laugh, how he used to carry her around the apartment in a laundry basket just to make her giggle. She told him about Ruth, about working at the diner, about the years that had hollowed her out and a few people who had helped fill her again. When she began to cry, he held her hand. Thank you, he said, voice rasping, for letting me see you. By the time the sun began to set, he was asleep again. Savannah sat beside him, watching the golden light spill across the bedspread, feeling the warmth of something she'd never known she missed. She had come looking for answers. Instead, she had found a part of herself. Savannah awoke in the guest bedroom to the quiet rustling of trees outside the window. The house was still, the kind of stillness that feels sacred. It had been years since she'd slept somewhere so peaceful, where the walls didn't creak from strangers or fear. The events of the previous day came back slowly. Her father's thin smile, the way he squeezed her hand, the stories he told through laboured breaths. It felt like a dream, a fragile, painful, beautiful dream. She got dressed quietly and padded down the hall in her socks. The smell of brewed coffee and cinnamon greeted her. Margaret was in the kitchen, humming to herself. She looked up as Savannah entered and smiled warmly. He's still sleeping. He had a good night. That's good, Savannah said, wrapping her arms around herself. Margaret placed a plate of toast and fruit on the counter. Eat something. He wouldn't forgive me if I let you go hungry. Savannah smiled. And for once, it wasn't forced. After breakfast, she made her way to her father's room again. The sun had crept into the room, warming the covers around his feet. He stirred as she stepped in. You came back, he said, groggily. I said I would, she answered gently, taking her seat beside him. There was a pause before he asked, Do you think you can forgive me for not being there when it mattered? Savannah looked at him for a long moment. I don't blame you, she said softly. I spent a lot of years angry, but now I understand more, and I don't want to spend the rest of my life being bitter. He blinked slowly, emotion washing over his worn features. "You're stronger than I ever was." Savannah gave a shaky laugh. "You never even got the chance." They sat quietly for a while after that. She read him a few pages from the novel that sat on his nightstand, her voice soothing and low. Occasionally he'd close his eyes, and she'd pause, unsure if he was listening or slipping away. But each time his fingers twitched in hers, a silent answer: "I'm still here." By evening, Charles arrived to take her home. He gave her space, speaking only when needed, respecting the delicate threads being woven between father and daughter. As she packed her bag, her father handed her a small weathered envelope. "I've kept this for years," he said. "Didn't know if I'd ever give it to you. It's not much, but it's yours." She opened it carefully after he drifted back to sleep. Inside was a faded photograph, her as a baby, swaddled in a blue blanket, him grinning, youthful and tired and proud. And behind it, a folded letter in trembling handwriting. "To my daughter, if you ever read this, it means you found your way back to me. I've loved you every day of your life, even the ones I missed. I never stopped looking. I hope you'll forgive the world for what it took from us. But even more, I hope you know you were never forgotten. Love always, Dad." Savannah held the paper to her chest, tears slipping down her cheeks. She didn't sob. It wasn't that kind of grief. It was quieter, like finally setting down a burden too heavy to carry anymore. Before she left, she kissed her father's forehead. "I'll come back soon," she promised. He looked up at her with misty eyes. He glanced at her, his voice gentle. "He was my friend, but you're the reason I came. You reminded me that kindness doesn't always look grand. Sometimes it's a quiet girl offering soup to an old man who hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks." She gave a soft smile. "Your kindness," he added, "changed everything." Back in the city, Savannah returned to her modest life, but something had shifted inside her. She no longer felt invisible, no longer like a ghost walking through borrowed spaces. She belonged somewhere now, even if it was just in one man's memory. And for the first time, that was enough. Savannah returned to her routine as if nothing had changed, but everything had. The diner looked the same. Ruth's tiny kitchen still smelled like thyme and soap. The city still moved too fast, but inside her, a quiet rearranging had taken place. She found herself looking at faces longer, noticing strangers more deeply, wondering what stories they carried, what losses they had survived, what kindness they had once offered, and whether anyone ever noticed. At night, she read her father's letter again and again. She kept it folded in the small box Ruth had given her one Christmas, worn pinewood, with a lid that squeaked a little when you opened it. Alongside it sat the photograph. She pressed it flat and tucked it under a thin sheet of plastic, He looked so alive in it, so hopeful. That made it hurt worse, but also better. 1 week after her visit, Margaret called. Savannah had just finished her shift and was sitting on the diner's back steps, sipping lukewarm coffee. "He passed this morning," Margaret said gently. "He was peaceful. He had that picture of you beside his bed." Savannah closed her eyes. "Do you want to come for the service?" Margaret asked. "I do," Savannah whispered. "I want to say goodbye." The service was held on a clear Sunday morning under the old oaks behind his house. It was simple, just a few friends and former colleagues. No long eulogies, just quiet remembrances and trembling gratitude. Charles stood beside her the whole time, a steady, silent presence. After the others left, Savannah stayed behind. She knelt by the headstone, just his name and 2 dates. No quote, no inscription. "I didn't get enough time," she whispered, "but I'm glad I got some." A wind rustled the trees. She pulled from her pocket the photo of him holding her as a baby. She slid it gently beneath the edge of the stone. "You can keep it now," she said. That afternoon, Margaret invited her inside. "There's something he wanted you to have," she said, handing Savannah a large manila envelope and a small box. "He updated his will after you visited." Savannah's brows lifted in surprise. She opened the envelope first. Legal paperwork she couldn't immediately process. Margaret pointed to one section. "He left you the house, and everything in it." "What?" Savannah blinked. I can't take that. I don't need it." Margaret smiled, eyes kind. "It was his. Now it's yours. Whether you live in it, sell it, or let it sit empty, that's your choice. But it's what he wanted." Savannah was speechless. The old ache of not being wanted, not being seen, slowly melted away. Inside the box was a small gold locket. When she opened it, she found 2 photos, her mother's face on one side and her own baby picture on the other. "I found that in his drawer after he passed," Margaret said softly. "He used to wear it when no one was around." Tears welled up in Savannah's eyes. She closed the locket gently, holding it to her chest. The next few days passed in a haze. She walked the halls of the house like a ghost, revisiting someone else's dream. Her father's books still lined the shelves. His handwriting still lived in the margins. She sat at his piano bench and touched the keys, though she didn't play. When she opened a closet in the back room, she found a box labelled "For Savannah." Inside were children's books, her first shoes, a blanket embroidered with her name, and dozens of unsent letters, each one dated. Each one written to a little girl he could no longer find. She read every one. "Dear Savannah, today I saw a little girl in the park with curls like yours. Savannah, your birthday is next week. I wonder if you're turning 10. or if I've lost count. Savannah, I hope you're safe. I hope you're loved. I hope you still laugh when it rains. By the time she was done, Savannah wasn't crying anymore. She was simply full. Of grief, yes, but also of love. The kind that waited in the dark. The kind that left a light on, even when no one came home. She left the house that day, knowing she'd return. Not right away, but one day when she was ready. And as she stepped onto the train, heading back toward the city, she realized something. She hadn't just found her father, she had found herself. Life didn't suddenly turn into a fairy tale after Savannah inherited the house. The bills still came. The shifts at the diner still left her exhausted. But everything felt less hollow. There was a thread now, something to follow, a route that reached deeper than the cracked sidewalks and borrowed coats of the city, a reason to keep moving forward, not just surviving, but choosing. Back at the diner, Ruth noticed the change in her almost immediately. "You've got more colour in your cheeks," she commented one morning, handing Savannah a tray of blueberry muffins. "Something's different." "I went home," Savannah said. Ruth raised a brow. "I didn't know it was home until I got there," Savannah added. Ruth smiled, long and quiet. Funny how that works. Charles checked in every few days with a text or a short call. Never intrusive, never too much. Just a steady beat of support. One Thursday evening, he showed up at the diner just before closing. He sat at the far end of the counter, looking almost out of place in his tailored coat and quiet confidence. Savannah slid a mug of coffee in front of him. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. He shook his head, eyes warm. "Wanted to make sure you were okay." She gave a little shrug. "I'm better than I've been in a long time." They sat in silence for a while, the soft clatter of dishes the only sound. "Have you thought about what you'll do with the house?" he asked eventually. "I don't know," Savannah admitted. "Sometimes I think I'll sell it and use the money to finally get out of this city. Other times I imagine turning it into something, maybe a home for girls like me, ones who had nowhere to go." Charles looked at her with something close to awe. "You'd be good at that." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe I'm just dreaming too big." "There's no such thing," he said. "Not for someone like you." 2 weeks later, Savannah returned to the house for the weekend. The trees were beginning to change. Gold and crimson lined the gravel path, crunching beneath her boots. She walked room to room again, but this time it didn't feel like she was trespassing. It felt like stepping into a future only she could build. In the garage, she found her father's old toolbox and a dusty crate labeled "donation," not junk, with a winking smiley face. Inside were warm coats, sturdy shoes, unopened hygiene kits, and dozens of notebooks, like he had been quietly preparing for something or someone. She brought it all inside and laid it out on the dining table. Then she opened her laptop. She didn't know how to write grant proposals. She didn't know how to run a non-profit. But she knew what it felt like to be invisible. And she knew what it meant when someone, a stranger, a diner owner, a dying man, saw you anyway. That night, she wrote until her fingers ached. A vision, a purpose, a plan. She titled the document Kind Threads, because that's what she'd found. A single act of kindness that unraveled everything and rewove her life into something new. The months that followed were a whirlwind. Savannah poured every ounce of energy into Kind Threads, a small non-profit dedicated to helping young women aging out of foster care find stability and hope. She recruited volunteers, applied for grants, and partnered with local businesses willing to donate clothes and job training. Slowly but surely, Kind Threads became more than just a dream. Ruth was her steadfast anchor, always ready with a warm meal or a comforting word after long days of paperwork and planning. Charles remained a quiet support, often stopping by the centre after work to help unpack donations or listen when Savannah needed to vent. One chilly autumn afternoon, Savannah stood in the main room of the newly renovated house, the place she once feared but now called home. Around her were young women laughing, trying on clothes, filling out resumes, and sharing stories over hot chocolate. She watched them and felt a swell of pride. They were threads in the same fabric, a tapestry of resilience and kindness. Her phone buzzed. A message from Charles. Your father would be proud. Savannah smiled, heart full. She typed back, so am I. The suit she had given to an old man months ago, the one that sparked this whole journey, hung in the coat room at Kind Threads. It was a symbol of kindness's power to change lives, one small act at a time. And for Savannah, it was the beginning of everything. If you like the story, I would be very happy to have your support. Click the thumbs up. And to not miss new stories, subscribe and click on the bell. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, and all the best.